The relentless autumn downpour battered the leaded windows of Ravensmere Castle, sending cascades of water streaming down the glass like tears from the heavens. Lady Seraphina Whitlock flattened herself against the ornate wainscoting of the upper corridor, her pulse racing beneath the layers of her sapphire taffeta gown. She strained to hear over the storm's roar, footsteps, perhaps, or the telltale murmur of a voice she had come to dread. "Seraphina, my radiant muse, do not hide from the light of my affection." The words echoed through the hallway, carried on the oblivious enthusiasm of Lord Benedict Ashford. Guests at the Dowager Duchess's grand soirée were beginning to whisper, their fans fluttering like startled birds as Benedict's pursuit turned heads. Seraphina's cheeks burned with humiliation. This was why she had rejected his suit a fortnight ago. Benedict wasn't a villain, far from it. As the younger son of the Earl of Fairhaven, he boasted kindness, fortune, and lineage that made her parents beam with approval. Her father, the Marquis of Crestwood, had already envisioned alliances forged in matrimony, while her mother sketched guest lists in her mind. But Benedict's flaw was glaring, a complete absence of discretion. His wooing had been a barrage of florid sonnets declaimed at tea parties, garlands so vast they obstructed doorways, and avowals of eternal love proclaimed in hushed theaters. When Seraphina had declined him politely, explaining their mismatch, he had smiled indulgently, kissed her hand, and declared her merely overwhelmed by passion's grandeur. He hadn't grasped a word. "Seraphina, your grace rivals the moon's gentle glow." His voice drew nearer, now likening her to lunar phenomena, as snickers rippled among the onlookers. Desperation clawed at her. She needed refuge, oblivion, until Benedict's fervor waned. Her gaze snagged on a sturdy mahogany door, ajar and unlit from within. Without a second thought, Seraphina darted inside, easing it shut and twisting the key with quivering hands. The chamber enveloped her in warmth, illuminated faintly by a candelabrum and the hearth's crackling blaze. She sagged against the door, eyes shut in respite as Benedict's steps receded, his calls fading into the castle's depths. "Begging your pardon." A deep voice shattered the silence. Seraphina's eyes snapped open. This was no empty parlor. It was a bedchamber and occupied. By the fireside stood a man in linen shirt-sleeves and a half-unbuttoned waistcoat, a cloth slung over his shoulder, his raven hair glistening with recent dampness. He cradled a goblet of amber liquid, his face a blend of astonishment, humor, and intrigue. He was strikingly handsome, tall, with a frame honed by vigor, chiseled features, angular jaw, prominent cheekbones, and eyes of piercing emerald that evoked ancient forests. "I," Seraphina's voice emerged as a squeak. She cleared her throat. "Forgive me. I believe this room unoccupied." His mouth quirked into a languid grin that quickened her heartbeat. "Evidently not. I shall depart at once. Pardon the imposition." She turned toward the door. "Seraphina, my enchanting siren, where have you vanished?" Benedict's voice boomed closer, freezing her in place. The stranger arched a brow. "That wouldn't be Lord Benedict Ashford, would it?" His tone brimmed with suppressed mirth. Seraphina's mortification peaked. "You know him. Oxford contemporaries. Solid chap, utterly inept with the fairer sex." He placed his glass aside, arms folding as he appraised her. "I gather you're his current quarry." "The reluctant target of his zeal," Seraphina amended, chin lifting defiantly despite her flush. "I spurned his offer 2 weeks past, yet he deems it coyness demanding dog chase." The man erupted in laughter, a rich, joyous peal that warmed the room. Classic Benedict. He once wooed a viscount's daughter for months post her betrothal to another, convinced it a trial of resolve. Seraphina's lips twitched involuntarily. And the outcome? She wed the rival, relocated to Vienna, bore twins ere he relented. He chuckled, shaking his head. Well-intentioned, but nuance eludes him. "Seraphina, are you perchance in the conservatory, communing with the blooms?" Benedict's voice hovered outside. Panic surged in Seraphina's eyes. Discovery here, unchaperoned in a man's quarters, would spell ruin, scandal, forced nuptials to Benedict to mend her repute. "Please," she whispered, imploring the stranger. "I have no claim, but—" He raised a hand, expression turning shrewd. "The alcove drapes," he murmured, nodding to the thick brocade curtains framing the storm-lashed panes. "Hasten." Seraphina didn't dally. She glided across the Aubusson rug, concealing herself as a rap echoed on the door. "A moment," the man intoned, voice laced with aristocratic command. Fabric rustled, perhaps donning a coat for propriety. The lock turned, door creaking open. "Benedict," he greeted, cordial yet resolute. "What draws you to the private quarters?" "Lucian. I hadn't heard of your return." Benedict's delight rang clear, muffled by the barrier. "Thought you lingered in the Highlands." Lucian Vale, Duke of Ravensmere. The name struck Seraphina like lightning. She cowered in the Duke's personal chamber, eavesdropping while he parleyed in dishabille. Catastrophe amplified. "Arrived this eve," the Duke replied evenly. "The stag proved dull. But explain your presence here." "Festivities are below." "Hunting Lady Seraphina Whitlock," Benedict proclaimed unabashedly. "Seen her? Auburn locks like autumn leaves, eyes akin to—" "None such," the Duke cut in. "I've just bathed from travel. Benedict, mayhap the lady prefers solitude. Poppycock, she's bashful. Once she fathoms my ardor, she'll recant her rash nay." Seraphina stifled a moan behind her hand. "Benedict." The Duke's patience thinned. As a comrade, a rebuff is an invitation to persist. It's discomforting. "You misconstrue." "I grasp fully. And guests ponder your hall-roaming recitals. Return below, lest alarm spreads." Silence stretched. Seraphina held her breath. "Perhaps you're right," Benedict yielded. "But if you spy Seraphina, inform her I linger in the library with an ode penned for her." "Duly noted," the Duke drawled. "Now, I must attire for supper." Footfalls retreated, doors secured anew. "You may surface, Lady Seraphina," the Duke called, amusement threading his words. Peril averted. She emerged, face aflame. "I cannot fathom my chagrin." "Spare apologies." Duke Lucian waved dismissively, eyes sparkling. "This trumps any prior welcome. Benedict chasing you like a foxhound, you veiled in my sanctum, pure comedy." Seraphina laughed despite herself. "Utterly ludicrous." He poured another brandy, extending it. "For fortitude. You seem in need." She accepted hesitantly, sipping the fiery liquid. "Your kindness overwhelms, your grace." "Lucian, if you will. Allies now." He lounged by the fire, indicating the facing armchair. "How long this siege?" "Fortnight." Seraphina seated herself, tension easing. "Blossoms versus window ballads, public oaths. Father deems me daft for refusing profit. Mother implies over-pickiness." "And your view?" His query startled. Men seldom sought her intellect. "I deem wedlock to Benedict soul-stifling," she confessed, meeting his gaze. "He's benign, yet views me as trophy idolized afar. Ignores my essence, thoughts, views, desires. At proposal, I voiced this. He lauded my loveliness, needing no intellects adorn." Lucian's face shadowed. "Imbecile." "Intended praise. Worsens it." He leaned in. "Rightly rejected. Union demands parity, not ornamentation. You hold that?" Seraphina queried, warmed. "Aye. My forebears embodied it. Father prized mother's wisdom, she honed him. Respect, camaraderie, fondness, not vapid worship." "Enviable," Seraphina murmured. "Minds arranged accord, civil, naught else." "Desire that. Mere civility." "Nay." Vehemence surprised her. "I crave visibility, worth. Dialogue, mirth. And—" "Passion," Lucian supplied softly. Their eyes locked. Heat bloomed, unrelated to flames. The mantel clock tolled, signaling dinner's approach. "I must depart," Seraphina said regretfully, rising. "We'll cloak this." Lucian stood. "Servants stare, yonder leads to powder room, unobserved. You'd aid more, post my trespass." "My lady," is grin mischievous, this enlivens tedium. "Honored to facilitate flight. Though eager for Benedict's reaction at table, we're strangers." Seraphina smiled. "Indeed, your grace." He proffered his arm, guiding her. "No ties." At threshold, she paused. "Gratitude, Lucian." "The delight," he whispered, "was mine, Seraphina." The great hall of Ravensmere Castle shimmered like a jewel box. 1,000 beeswax candles blazed in the chandeliers, their light fracturing into prisms across crystal goblets and silver iperns. Seraphina slipped in through a side door just as the dinner gong sounded, her pulse still thrumming from the memory of Lucian's, whispered, "The delight was mine." She smoothed an invisible crease from her sapphire skirts and took the seat indicated by her place card, only to feel the air shift behind her. The chair to her immediate right bore a single elegant card, His Grace the Duke of Ravensmere. Of course it did. Lucian entered moments later, immaculate in midnight blue velvet and crisp white linen, the damp curls now tamed into a severe queue that only made the sharp bones of his face more arresting. He inclined his head to the table at large, then paused when his gaze found hers. A flicker, half amusement, half something far warmer, passed between them before he sat. "Lady Seraphina Whitlock," he said with perfect formality, as though they had never shared brandy beside his fire. "We have not, I believe, been introduced." "The honor is mine, your grace," she answered, the words tasting like a secret. At the head of the table, the Dowager Duchess of Ravensmere, Lucian's formidable mother, Lady Honoria, raised her glass. "To absent friends and unexpected homecomings," she declared, her eyes lingering fondly on her son. Lucian lifted his own glass in salute, but Seraphina felt the weight of his attention settle on her, like a hand, at the small of her back. The first course arrived, a clear consommé scented with thyme. Conversation blossomed around them. To Seraphina's left sat Mrs. Drummond-Burrell, one of the Tun's most exacting patronesses, who immediately began quizzing her on the London season. "And tell me, child, is Lord Benedict Ashford still composing odes to your eyebrows?" the lady asked with acid sweetness. Seraphina felt heat flood her cheeks. "Lord Benedict is generous with his verses." Lucian, buttering a roll with deliberate calm, murmured just loudly enough for her and Mrs. Drummond-Burrell to hear, "Generosity is a virtue. Taste, however, is a rarer gift." Mrs. Drummond-Burrell gave a bark of laughter that startled the footman. Seraphina bit her lip to keep from laughing outright. Across the table, Benedict himself was seated between two giggling debutantes, but his gaze kept darting towards Seraphina like a compass needle seeking north. When the fish course was served, sole in a delicate white wine sauce, he could contain himself no longer. He rose, glass aloft. "A toast," he cried, "to the lady whose beauty outshines the chandelier's glow." A dozen heads swiveled. Seraphina's stomach sank. Lucian set down his fork with a soft, dangerous click. Before Benedict could finish, Lucian lifted his own glass and spoke in a voice that carried effortless authority. "To every lady at this table," he said, "whose wit and grace make evenings such as this worth enduring the rain for. And to my mother, who reminds us that true hospitality begins with kindness, not sonnets." Laughter rippled. Glasses rose in genuine enthusiasm. Benedict, deflated but smiling gamely, sat down. Seraphina risked a glance at Lucian. His eyes glinted with mischief and gratitude, and something else, something that made her toes curl inside her silk slippers. The courses marched on, venison and juniper, tiny ortolans wrapped in vine leaves, ices sculpted into swans. Between the removes, Lucian spoke to her in a low voice meant for her ears alone. "Your favorite poet?" he asked while a footman refilled their wine. "John Donne," she answered without hesitation. A slow smile curved his mouth. "A bold choice. License my roving hands and let them go slash before, behind, between, above, below." Heat flared across her chest. "I prefer the holy sonnets," she managed. "Liar," he whispered, and she nearly choked on her wine. When the ladies finally withdrew, leaving the gentlemen to their port, Seraphina felt the loss of his presence like a sudden chill. In the drawing-room, she endured an hour of tepid music and tepid tea before the Dowager Duchess announced that the storm had eased enough for a turn on the moonlit terrace. Seraphina slipped outside first, drawing her shawl close against the damp night air. The terrace overlooked the castle's rose garden, now silvered by moonlight and glistening with raindrops. She had not been there 2 minutes when a warm wool greatcoat settled over her shoulders. "You will catch your death," Lucian said quietly, coming to stand beside her. He did not touch her, but the space between them felt charged, humming. "I thought dukes did not feel the cold," she teased. "Dukes feel a great many things they are not supposed to admit." He rested his forearms on the balustrade, staring out at the dark gardens. "Benedict means well, you know." "I know," she sighed. "That almost makes it worse." Silence stretched, companionable yet taut. At last he spoke, voice low. "When I was 21, I lost someone. Fever took her in a single night. After that, I decided passion was a luxury I could not afford again. Safer to keep the world at a distance." Seraphina turned to him, the moonlight painting silver along the strong line of his jaw. "And now," he said, meeting her eyes, "a certain lady has tumbled into my bedchamber, drunk my brandy, hidden behind my curtains, and quoted John Donne at my dinner table. Distance feels rather less appealing." Her breath caught. "Lucien." He lifted a hand, not quite touching her cheek. "Nothing improper. Not here, not yet. But I find I am no longer content to be a stranger to you, Seraphina. Will you walk with me tomorrow? There is a folly by the lake. No one will disturb us." The night itself seemed to hold its breath. "Yes," she whispered. His smile was slow, almost shy, an expression she had never imagined on the face of the formidable Duke of Ravensmere. "Then tomorrow," he said, and brushed the barest kiss across her gloved knuckles before the sound of approaching footsteps forced him to step back into the shadows. Seraphina stood alone on the terrace a moment longer, the echo of his lips burning through silk and kid leather, wondering how a single evening had turned her carefully ordered world entirely upon its head. Morning at Ravensmere Castle dawned pearl gray and dripping. Mist clung to the ancient oaks like lace, and the lake lay still as polished steel beneath a sky the color of a mourning dove's wing. Seraphina had slept scarcely 3 hours, yet she rose before the housemaids, her pulse already thrumming with anticipation. She chose a walking dress of forest green kerseymere, simple enough to seem accidental, yet it made her eyes look almost gold in certain lights. A note had been slipped beneath her door at dawn. "The west gate at 10. Wear stout boots. L." At 5 minutes to the hour she was there, half hidden beneath the stone arch, hood drawn up against the damp. Lucien appeared on horseback, leading a glossy bay mare already saddled for a lady. He wore no coat, only a dark green shooting jacket open at the throat, and the sight of him, wind-tousled, smiling, utterly unlike the austere Duke of the night before, stole the breath from her lungs. "You came," he said simply, as though he had half expected her not to. "I gave my word," she replied, accepting his laced fingers to mount. The mare danced beneath her, sensing excitement. They rode in silence at first, following a bridle path that wound through parkland silvered with dew. When the castle had dwindled to a toy fortress behind them, Lucien slowed until their horses walked knee to knee. "I used to escape here as a boy," he said, gesturing toward the mist-shrouded water ahead. "My father believed fresh air cured everything from Latin conjugations to heartbreak. He was usually right." "And did you suffer much heartbreak as a boy?" she teased. He gave a rueful half-smile. "Only the sort caused by ponies and elder brothers. The deeper kind came later." They reached the lake's edge. Hidden among reeds and willows stood the Folly, a miniature Greek temple of pale stone, its columns entwined with late-blooming honeysuckle. Lucien dismounted, tied the horses, and offered his arm. Inside, the air smelled of damp marble and honey. Sunlight filtered through the open roof, striping the floor in gold. A cushioned bench ran along one wall. On it lay a folded blanket, a small hamper, and a single white rose. "You planned this," Seraphina accused softly. "I hoped," he corrected. He spread the blanket, opened the hamper, cold chicken, fresh bread, strawberries still wet with dew, and a bottle of sparkling wine. "I dismissed the servants for the morning. We are quite alone." They ate slowly, speaking of everything and nothing. Her secret fondness for Gothic novels, his disastrous first attempt at waltzing, the way the lake froze solid one winter, and an entire house party skated by torchlight. Laughter came easily, and with it a loosening of restraint. When the strawberries were gone, Lucien brushed a drop of juice from her lower lip with his thumb. The touch lingered. "Tell me truthfully," he said, voice low. "If Benedict were not pursuing you, if your father had never mentioned marriage, would you still be content to live quietly at Crestwood, embroidering cushions and attending county assemblies?" The question pierced straight to the bone. "No," she admitted. "I would wither. I want more. Travel. Debate. Someone who argues with me, and then kisses me to concede the point." His eyes darkened. "Dangerous words, Seraphina." "Are they?" She lifted her chin. "Then perhaps I am more dangerous than I appear." For a heartbeat he was perfectly still. Then he moved, not the careful, courtly gesture of a duke, but the swift, certain motion of a man who had decided something irrevocable. He cupped her face in both hands and kissed her. It was not gentle. It was hunger and relief and months, no years, of restraint shattering at once. She rose onto her knees to meet him, fingers threading through his hair, the taste of strawberries and wine sharp between them. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. I swore I would not do that, he said against her mouth. I am very glad you broke your oath. He laughed a rough, wondering sound and kissed her again, slower this time, deeper, until her bonnet tumbled to the marble floor and his cravat followed. His hands slid to her waist, pulling her flush against him. Hers traced the hard line of his back through linen grown damp from the mist. The world narrowed to heat and heartbeat and the soft rustle of kerseymere against velvet. Eventually, minutes or hours later, time had lost all meaning. He rested his forehead against hers. Seraphina, he said, voice ragged, I need you to understand. I am not a man who dallies. If we continue down this path, I will not be content with stolen kisses and follies. I will want all of you, name, future, children, arguments at breakfast, everything. The words should have terrified her. Instead, they settled inside her chest like warm stones. And if I want the same, she whispered. His answer was another kiss, fierce with promise. They might have stayed lost in each other far longer had not the sudden clop of hooves on the path outside shattered the idyll. Lucian stiffened, then moved with startling speed, shielding her body with his as he peered through the columns. A rider in Ashford livery was cantering along the lake's edge, Benedict's groom, by the scarlet cockade. The man was clearly searching. Damnation, Lucian muttered. He pressed a quick, hard kiss to her lips. Stay here. Do not move until I return. He snatched up his cravat, knotted it carelessly, and strode out into the sunlight. Seraphina heard the low murmur of voices, Lucian's calm authority, the groom's nervous deference, then the receding hoofbeats. When Lucian came back, his expression was grim. Benedict has convinced himself you are lost or hurt. He has half the male guests forming search parties. Your maid noticed your absence and raised the alarm. Seraphina's heart plummeted. They will think. They will think exactly what they wish to think, he finished flatly. But I will not allow your name to be ruined because of me. He knelt before her, taking both her hands. Listen carefully. You will ride back now by the north track. It circles behind the stables and brings you to the servants' court. No one will see you. I will follow in 20 minutes and announce that I encountered you walking and escorted you safely home. Your reputation remains untouched. And us? She asked, hating the tremor in her voice. His grip tightened. This is not the end, Seraphina. Only a delay. I swear it. She searched his face and found nothing but iron resolve. Trust me, he said. She did. Minutes later, she was urging the mare along the hidden path, hair streaming beneath her hood, lips still swollen from his kisses, the taste of strawberries and reckless hope lingering like summer on her tongue. Behind her, somewhere across the silver water, Lucian watched until she vanished into the trees, then turned his horse toward the castle, and whatever storm awaited them both. 3 days had passed since the folly, and Ravensmere Castle felt like a powder keg with a very short fuse. Seraphina moved through the public hours like a ghost in sapphire and cream, smiling at archery on the south lawn, partnering Benedict in a tedious country dance, allowing her mother to parade her before dowagers who measure her dowry against her waist. All the while she carried Lucian's last whispered promise branded beneath her skin. This is not the end. Only a delay. But delays have a way of festering. On the 4th morning a letter arrived at breakfast, sealed in black wax with the crest of the Marquis of Crestwood. Her father's handwriting was on the outside, sharp as a blade. My dear daughter, Lord Benedict Ashford has requested a private audience this afternoon. I have granted it. You will receive him in the Gold Salon at 3 o'clock. Your mother and I are in agreement. A second refusal would be the height of ingratitude. Consider carefully where your duty lies. Crestwood. Seraphina read it twice, the words blurring. Around her the breakfast room buzzed with chatter, but she heard none of it. Only the thud of her own heart, too loud, too fast. At 3 o'clock precisely, Benedict entered the Gold Salon smelling of bergamot and nervous hope. He carried no flowers this time, only a small velvet box. Seraphina, he began, dropping to one knee with theatrical grace, I will not bore you with poetry again. I have learned my lesson. He opened the box. Inside lay a sapphire ring surrounded by diamonds, large enough to buy a small estate. This belonged to my grandmother. I should like it to belong to my wife. Will you do me the very great honor? Benedict. She stopped him with a raised hand, gentle but firm. Please stand. I cannot accept this. His face crumpled, first confusion, then dawning hurt. But your father. My father is not the one who must live with you for the next 50 years. The words came out sharper than she intended. She softened them. You deserve a lady who can return your devotion wholeheartedly. That lady is not me. He stared as though she had struck him. There is someone else, he said slowly. It was not a question. Serafina's breath caught. She could lie, salvage his pride, spare them both. Instead she heard herself answer, there may be. I do not yet know. Benedict closed the box with snap. Then I have been a fool twice over. He bowed, stiff and sudden, and left without another word. The silence that followed felt like the aftermath of cannon fire. That evening the castle hosted a masquerade, the Dowager Duchess's final grand gesture before the house party dispersed. Masks and dominoes turned every corridor into a fever dream of silk and secrets. Serafina chose a gown of midnight blue scattered with tiny silver stars and a half-mask of black lace. She told herself she only wished to lose herself in the crowd. She was wrong. She had not taken 10 steps into the ballroom before a gloved hand closed around her wrist and drew her through a side door into the dimly lit music gallery above the dancers. Lucien released her only long enough to bolt the door behind them. He wore black domino and a plain silver mask, but she would have known the set of those shoulders anywhere. I heard what happened this afternoon, he said without preamble. His voice was rough, almost angry. Benedict left for London an hour ago. He took the Ashford carriage, and half the servants swear he was weeping. Serafina's heart twisted. I did not mean to wound him so deeply. You spoke truth. That is never the wrong choice. Lucien pulled off his mask, revealing eyes stormy with some emotion she could not name. But your father will be furious. The Marquis is not a man who enjoys being crossed. I know. She swallowed. He has already written that my ingratitude will be the talk of the county. Lucien stepped closer until she could feel the heat radiating from him. Then let us give them something else to talk about. He reached into his coat and drew out a folded parchment sealed, like her father's letter, in black wax. But this crest was different, a raven in flight beneath a ducal coronet. My special license, he said quietly. Obtained in London last month, against the day, I might need it. It bears both our names. Serafina stared at the document as though it might bite her. You procured a special license before we had even. Before I had kissed you senseless in folly by the lake. A crooked smile. Call it arrogance. Or foresight. She looked up, pulse hammering. If I take this, there is no going back. My father will disown me. Half the ton will call me fortune hunter. Let them. His voice dropped to a growl. I have lands, houses, a dukedom older than half the peerage. I can weather their spite. The only question is whether you can. He was offering her everything and nothing. A future built on scandal and passion, and the terrifying certainty of his love. Serafina took the license from his fingers. The parchment was warm from his body. I have spent my life being careful, she said. Tonight I choose to be brave. Relief and triumph flared in his eyes. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her as though the world were ending at midnight, and they had only these stolen minutes left. When they broke apart, both were trembling. Tomorrow, he said against her lips. The castle chapel at dawn. My mother will stand witness. The chaplain owes me a favor older than you are. We will be married before the household stirs. And then we ride for Scotland until the gossip dies or the world ends, whichever comes first. He brushed a thumb across her cheek, catching a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. Say it, Serafina. Say you will be my duchess. She laughed through the tears, the sound wild and free. Yes, Lucien Vale. 1,000 times yes. Below them the orchestra struck up a waltz. Masked figures spun in jeweled circles, none of them aware that in the gallery above, 2 hearts had just rewritten their destinies. Serafina slipped the special license into her glove, right against her racing pulse. Tomorrow she would become Her Grace Serafina, Duchess of Ravensmere. Tonight she was simply a woman in love, dancing on the edge of scandal with the only man who had ever truly seen her. The castle slept under a thin blanket of frost. No clock struck 5, the bell ropes had been muffled by Lucien's orders. Only the ravens in the tower stirred, croaking once as the first pale blade of light slipped over the horizon. Serafina had not undressed. She had sat in her shift on the window seat all night, watching the sky shift from ink to pearl, the special license clutched in her hand like a talisman. At 4:30 a soft scratch came at the door. A maid, one of Lucien's own, sworn to silence, pressed a bundle into her arms, a simple traveling dress of deep claret wool, a heavy cloak lined with sable, and a single white camellia for her hair. No wedding gown, no orange blossoms, only the promise of a new life. She was ready in minutes. The corridors were empty, lit only by the occasional taper left burning for night watchmen. The maid led her down a narrow priest's stair that smelled of candle smoke and centuries of prayer, then through a side door into the private chapel. It was smaller than she had imagined, 12 oak pews, a single rose window bleeding crimson and gold across the flagstones, and at the altar Lucien. He wore black, no lace, no jewels, only the severe elegance of a man who needed no ornament. When he turned and saw her, something fierce and tender broke across his face. He took one involuntary step forward before remembering himself. Behind him stood the Dowager Duchess, wrapped in a dark green velvet robe, her silver hair loose on her shoulders. She looked as though she had not slept either, yet her eyes were bright with approval and something that might have been tears. And beside her, the elderly chaplain in nightcap and cassock, clutching the prayer book like a shield. Lucien came down the aisle to meet her. He did not speak. He simply took her cold hands in his warm ones and pressed a kiss to each set of knuckles, as though sealing an oath older than words. "Are you certain?" he whispered against her skin. "More certain than I have ever been of anything," she answered. They walked to the altar together. The service was brief, almost stark. No music, no witnesses save the Dowager and the ravens outside. When the chaplain reached the vows, Lucien's voice rang clear and unshaken through the quiet chapel. "I, Lucien Alexander Vale, take thee, Seraphina Elizabeth, to my wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death us do part." Seraphina's own voice trembled only once. When she reached to love, cherish, and to obey, the traditional word caught in her throat, and Lucien's eyes flashed with sudden amusement. She finished steadily, and when the chaplain pronounced them man and wife, Lucien did not wait for permission. He kissed her as though the world had already begun to burn. The ring he slid onto her finger was not the ostentatious Ashford sapphire. It was an ancient band of Welsh gold, engraved inside with ravens in flight, and a Latin motto she would later translate, "As I chose, I am chosen." It fit perfectly. The Dowager stepped forward then, embracing Seraphina with surprising strength. "Welcome to the family, my dear," she said, voice husky. "You have made my son impossibly happy and me impossibly proud." Outside, the sky had turned the color of fresh cream. Lucien drew Seraphina's cloak more securely around her shoulders. "The carriage is waiting beyond the old gate," he murmured. "4 horses, no crest on the panels. We ride north until the road ends and the sea begins." She laughed, a soft, wondering sound. "And my father will rage, write furious letters, and eventually realize he has lost the argument." Lucien's smile turned wolfish. "By then you will be Duchess of Ravensmere in every way that matters, and carrying my name will protect you better than any battalion." They stepped out into the freezing dawn. A plain black traveling coach stood ready, the horses stamping steam into the air. The driver touched his hat, but asked no questions. Lucien handed her up, then paused on the step. "One moment," he said, and disappeared back into the castle. He returned less than a minute later, carrying something wrapped in oilskin. When he climbed in beside her and shut the door, he pressed it into her lap. "Your wedding gift," he said. She unwrapped it carefully, a leather-bound book, new and heavy. On the flyleaf, in Lucien's bold hand, was written, "To my wife, who taught a raven to sing. Read this when you doubt anything, including me. Forever yours, Lucien. Ravensmere, this 14th day of November, 1817." Beneath the inscription he had copied, in his own hand, the entirety of John Donne's The Sun Rising. Seraphina's eyes filled. She closed the book and kissed him, slow, deliberate, tasting salt and dawn and impossible happiness. The coach lurched forward. Gravel crunched beneath the wheels as they rolled beneath the ancient portcullis and out onto the north road. Behind them, Ravensmere Castle dwindled to a dark shape against the rising sun. Ahead lay Scotland, winter, and the rest of their lives. Seraphina leaned her head against her husband's shoulder, and for the first time in years, felt the future open wide and unafraid before her. They traveled fast and light, changing horses at lonely posting inns where the ostlers asked no questions of a plainly dressed gentleman and his quiet wife. By the second night, they were deep into Yorkshire, the great moors rolling black and silver beneath a hunter's moon. Lucian had booked the entire upper floor of a rambling coaching inn called the Black Swan. The innkeeper, sensing quality despite the lack of crested carriage, gave them the best parlor and a bedchamber with a fire already roaring. When the door closed behind the last servant, the silence felt enormous. Seraphina stood in the center of the room, suddenly shy. She was a duchess now, married, ringed, kissed in a chapel at dawn, yet the reality of it still hovered just out of reach, like a word on the tip of the tongue. Lucian shrugged out of his greatcoat and tossed it over a chair. The firelight carved bronze along the hard lines of his shoulders and caught in his eyes when he turned to her. "Cold?" he asked softly. "A little." He crossed the room in 3 strides, took the edges of her cloak, and eased it from her shoulders. The claret traveling dress followed, buttons slipped free one by one. No maid, no haste, only the patient reverence of a man who had waited years for the right to touch. When the gown pooled at her feet, she stood in nothing but chemise and stockings, trembling more from anticipation than chill. Lucian's breath audibly caught. He traced a single fingertip along the line of her collarbone, down the center of her chest, stopping just above the frantic beat of her heart. "Tell me to stop at any moment," he said, voice rough. "And I will." She answered by reaching for the buttons of his waistcoat. Clothing fell away like autumn leaves. When skin finally met skin, the shock of it drew a soft cry from her throat. He lifted her, carried her to the bed, and laid her down as though she were made of glass and starlight. There was no awkwardness, only discovery, slow, deliberate, sometimes laughing when knees knocked or hair tangled. He kissed every inch of her as if mapping new territory, the hollow beneath her ear, the soft underside of her breast, the delicate skin inside her wrist where her pulse fluttered like a trapped bird. When his mouth found the center of her, she arched off the bed with a broken gasp, fingers clenched in his hair. Afterwards, when she was trembling and half sobbing with pleasure, he rose above her, eyes locked with hers. "Seraphina," he said, her name a prayer and a question. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, now, Lucian." He entered her carefully, watching her face for any sign of pain. There was only a brief sting, then a fullness that made her breath hitch in wonder. They moved together, slow at first, learning the rhythm of married bodies, then faster, urgent, until the world narrowed to heat and friction and the low, reverent sound of her name on his lips as he followed her over the edge. They lay tangled and breathless in the wreck of the bedclothes. Outside, an owl called across the moor. Lucian drew lazy circles on her bare shoulder. "I had intended to be gentle," he murmured against her temple. "You were perfect," she said, and felt him smile into her hair. Much later, when the fire had burned low and moonlight striped the floor, she traced the small scar just beneath his left collarbone. "Waterloo?" she asked quietly. "Talavera, actually. A French dragoon thought my horse looked finer than his." He caught her hand, kissed the inside her wrist. "I was careless then. I will not be careless with you." She believed him utterly. They made love again before dawn, slower this time, sleepy and languid, laughing softly when the ancient bed creaked in protest. When the first pale light crept through the shutters, Lucian rose only long enough to add coal to the fire, then returned to pull her back against his chest. "Sleep, wife," he whispered. "We have all the time in the world." But the world, as it happened, had other plans. At 9 o'clock came a thunderous knocking that rattled the door on its hinges. Lucian swore once, fluently, and reached for his breeches. "Stay here," he ordered, and went to answer it still shirtless, magnificently furious. The innkeeper stood outside, hat in hand, flanked by 2 travel-stained gentlemen in the unmistakable dark blue of Bow Street runners. "Your Grace," the innkeeper stammered, eyes fixed on the floorboards, "these men say they bear warrants from the Marquis of Crestwood. They claim your companion is not your lawful wife, and that you have abducted his daughter." The taller runner stepped forward, producing a folded document heavy with seals. "Lucian Alexander Vale, Duke of Ravensmere," he intoned, "by authority of—" Lucian snatched the paper, scanned it, and laughed, a short, dangerous sound. "This warrant is waste paper," he said, voice like tempered steel. Lady Seraphina Whitlock ceased to be the Marquise concern the moment she became Her Grace the Duchess of Ravensmere. "Here." He reached inside the door, retrieved the special license from the pocket of Seraphina's discarded cloak, and thrust it under the runner's nose. Signed by the Archbishop of Canterbury himself. Witnessed by the Dowager Duchess, and the chaplain of Ravensmere. You will find the entry already made in the castle register. Now remove yourselves before I have you both horsewhipped for disturbing my honeymoon." The runners exchanged uneasy glances. The innkeeper looked ready to sink through the floor. Seraphina appeared in the doorway behind Lucian, wrapped modestly in his banyan despite the fact that it swallowed her whole. Her hair spilled loose over her shoulders, and the new gold band glinted on her finger. "Good morning, gentlemen," she said sweetly. "Would you care for tea before you begin the long ride back to London? My husband grows testy when his breakfast is delayed." The taller runner cleared his throat. "Begging your pardon, your grace. A misunderstanding, clearly." They left within the quarter hour, tails between their legs. When the door closed again, Lucian leaned back against it and laughed until his shoulders shook. Seraphina joined him, the two of them sliding down to sit on the floor in a tangle of bare limbs and borrowed silk. "Your father," Lucian wheezed at last, "is a stubborn old devil." "He is," she agreed, wiping tears of mirth from her eyes. "But I believe we have just won the war." Lucian pulled her into his lap and kissed her thoroughly. "Then let the peace begin, your grace," he said against her mouth. Outside, the moor stretched wide and wild beneath a sky washed clean by winter sun. Ahead lay Gretna Green for a second, Scottish ceremony if they wished it, though they did not, then the Highlands, then home. Behind them, scandal would rage and die like any fire left unfed. In the quiet in bedroom, the new Duke and Duchess of Ravensmere began their married life exactly as they meant to go on, laughing, defiant, and gloriously, unapologetically in love. Spring came early to Ravensmere. The great iron gates stood open for the first time in 5 months, garlanded with white hawthorn and yellow forsythia. Word had spread like wildfire across 3 kingdoms. The Duke and Duchess were coming home. They had not been idle in their exile. After a month of snowbound bliss, in a hunting lodge above Loch Torridon, where the only witnesses to their days were red deer and golden eagles, they had traveled south through Scotland, stopping at every Vale estate to be received as man and wife. Tenants toasted them with whiskey older than the Union. Factors bowed, so low their foreheads brushed the ground. By the time they crossed the border into England, the tongue's gossip had shifted from scandalized outrage to grudging, then genuine admiration. The runaway Duchess had not only tamed the untamable Duke of Ravensmere, she had made him laugh in public. That, more than any special license, silenced the drawing rooms. Yet one dragon still waited. The Marquis of Crestwood had refused all correspondence since November. His last letter, delivered by a trembling footman to the Loch Torridon Lodge, had been a single line: "You are no longer my daughter." Seraphina had read it by candlelight, face pale but dry-eyed, then fed it to the fire without a word. Now, on the 27th of April, their traveling chariot, newly painted in Ravensmere black, with the ducal crest picked out in silver, rolled up the lime avenue, while ranks of tenants and servants cheered themselves hoarse. Lucian stepped down first, then turned to hand Seraphina out. She wore a gown of pale primrose silk that turned her hair to living flame in the sunlight, and on her finger the ancient Welsh gold band caught fire. The Dowager Duchess waited on the top step, flanked by every senior retainer the castle possessed. When Seraphina reached her, Honoria opened her arms without ceremony. "My darling girl," she said loudly enough for the entire forecourt to hear, "welcome home." There was a rustle at the edge of the crowd. A traveling coach, bearing the Crestwood arms, had drawn up behind the luggage carts. The Marquis himself descended, thinner than Seraphina remembered, leaning heavily on a cane. For a moment the courtyard held its breath. Lucian's hand settled at the small of his wife's back, protective, steadying. The Marquis looked at his daughter for a long, silent minute. Then his gaze moved to Lucian, measuring, weighing. At last he spoke, voice rough from disuse. "I have been an old fool." The crowd exhaled as one. Seraphina stepped forward. "Papa." He held up a hand. "No. Let me say this while I still have the courage." He took a halting step closer. "I wanted security for you. Instead, I nearly lost you entirely." His eyes, so like hers, glistened. "Can you forgive a proud man his pride?" Seraphina did not hesitate. She walked straight into his arms. The Marquis held her as though she might still vanish, then, to everyone's astonishment, turned to Lucian and offered his hand. "Your Grace," he said gruffly, "I appear to have misjudged you." Lucian clasped it firmly. "We all misjudge from time to time, sir. The measure of a man is what he does afterward." The Marquis gave a bark of laughter that sounded suspiciously like a sob. Damned if you're not right. That evening the castle blazed with light. Every window glowed, every chandelier was lit. The great hall had been transformed into a banquet worthy of a coronation. Lucian and Seraphina received their guests side by side, he in severe black velvet touched with silver, she in cloth of gold that made her look like a Renaissance portrait come to life. At the high table the Marquis raised his glass first. "To my daughter," he declared, "Her Grace the Duchess of Ravensmere, who taught her father that love is stronger than duty." A roar of approval shook the rafters. Later, when the orchestra struck up the first waltz, Lucian led Seraphina onto the floor. Hundreds of eyes followed them, but they saw only each other. "You are radiant," he murmured as they turned beneath the painted ceiling. "And you are insufferably pleased with yourself," she teased. "I have every reason to be." He spun her once, then drew her scandalously close. "I have the woman I love in my arms, the tun eating out of her hand, and her father drinking my best claret. I believe that constitutes victory." Seraphina laughed, the sound bright and unafraid. "You forgot one thing." "What is that?" She rose on tiptoe to whisper against his ear. "I am almost certainly carrying your heir." Lucian missed a step, only one, but it was enough to make the entire room gasp in delight. When he recovered, his eyes blazed with such fierce joy that several dowagers reached for their vinaigrettes. "Seraphina," he said, voice shaking, "you will be the death of me." "Or the making of you," she answered. He kissed her then, not a chaste marital peck, but a full, claiming kiss that would be spoken of in Mayfair for years. The orchestra faltered, then recovered in a triumphant swell. When they finally broke apart, the applause was deafening. Much later, in the quiet of the ducal bedchamber, the same room where a desperate lady had once hidden behind curtains, Lucian laid his hand gently over the slight curve of her belly that only he could yet discern. "A son or a daughter," he said wonderingly. "Either way, they will know they were conceived in defiance and born in love." Seraphina twined her fingers with his. "And they will grow up hearing the story of how their mother ran away with a duke." "Our favorite bedtime tale," he agreed, and kissed her again, slow and deep, until the candles burned low and the spring night wrapped them in velvet darkness. Outside, the ravens wheeled against a sky full of stars, and Ravensmere Castle, ancient, proud, and now joyously alive, stood sentinel over the beginning of a new legend. The Duke had found his Duchess. The runaway bride had come home. And love, as it always does when it is true, had won. Ever after, exactly as they chose. 25 years later, May 1842, the great doors of Ravensmere Castle stood wide open to the warmest spring in living memory. Roses spilled over the courtyard walls in reckless crimson and gold, the air smelled of lilac and fresh bread, and the salt wind that blew inland from the North Sea. A string quartet played beneath the lime trees, and every tenant for 20 miles had been invited to celebrate the silver wedding anniversary of the Duke and Duchess of Ravensmere. Lucian, now 50, wore his years the way a well-cut coat sits on broad shoulders. Silver threaded his black hair at the temples, fine lines fanned from the corners of his eyes, but the arms that lifted his youngest daughter into a spinning dance were as strong as they had ever been. Seraphina, at 43, had only grown more beautiful, her hair still the color of new copper, her eyes still laughing at him across a crowded lawn. They had 6 children now. Alexander, the heir, 24 and already too serious, stood talking crop rotation with his grandfather the Marquis, the two of them thick as thieves these days. The twins, Julian and Caroline, 22, were attempting to teach their Scottish cousins a scandalous new waltz. Beatrice, 19, was being serenaded by 3 smitten undergraduates beneath the yew arch. Her father pretended not to notice. Edmund, 16 and all limbs, was trying to persuade the orchestra to play something fast enough to race horses too. And little Margaret, 7, clung to Lucian's leg like a limpet, demanding to be thrown in the air again. Seraphina watched them from the terrace steps, a glass of champagne in one hand, the other resting lightly on the slight curve that told the entire family, though not yet the neighborhood, that number 7 was on the way. Lucian caught her eye, excused himself from a circle of admiring matrons, and crossed the lawn to her. He did not ask permission, he never did any more. He simply took the glass from her fingers, set it aside, and kissed her in front of God, the county, and half the peerage. "Behave," she murmured against his mouth, not meaning a word of it. "Never," he answered, and kissed her again. Alexander groaned theatrically. 25 years, and they are still disgraceful. His grandfather clapped him on the shoulder. "Pray you find a woman who makes you equally disgraceful, my boy. It is the only way to live." Later, when the sun dipped low, and the children had been bribed into the nursery with promises of fireworks, Lucian led Seraphina up the West Tower stairs to the little room that had once been his private study. The furniture had long since been moved out. Now it held only a wide day bed piled with cushions and a single portrait above the mantel, the two of them on their wedding morning, painted secretly by a young artist who had been sworn to silence. She wore the claret traveling dress. He wore the same fierce, wondering expression he still wore whenever he looked at her too long. He closed the door, turned the key, and leaned back against it. "Alone at last, your grace." Seraphina laughed softly. "We are never alone. We have 6 children, 3 dogs, your mother, my father, and approximately 400 guests downstairs. Then they can wait 5 more minutes." He crossed to her, cupped her face in hands that knew every line of it, and kissed her with the same hunger that had once driven them to a dawn chapel and a runaway carriage. When they drew apart, both were breathless. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked, the old question, now ritual between them. The scandal, the flight, the years of cutting remarks before they decided we were romantic instead of ruinous. She answered as she always did, tracing the scar beneath his collarbone through the fine linen of his shirt. "I regret nothing that brought me here. Not one cursed letter, not one slammed door, not one night on the great North Road with your arms around me and the stars rushing overhead." He rested his forehead against hers. "I built an empire of land and influence and still count that night as the richest of my life." Below them, fireworks began to burst over the lake, crimson, gold, emerald, the colors of Ravensmere. The children shrieked with delight. The orchestra struck up the Duke's favorite, an arrangement Seraphina had written in their first Scottish winter. Lucian drew her down onto the daybed, arranging her carefully, mindful of the new life they had made. "25 years ago," he said, voice low, "a terrified girl stumbled into my bedroom and changed my fate forever." And a half-dressed Duke decided to hide her behind his curtains instead of summoning a footman, she finished smiling. "Best decision I ever made." She kissed him then, slow and deliberate, tasting champagne and gunpowder and home. Outside, the fireworks painted the sky in triumphant color. Inside, the Duke and Duchess of Ravensmere celebrated their silver anniversary exactly as they had begun, alone together, a little scandalous, and perfectly, fiercely certain that every storm had been worth this quiet, blazing happiness. And if the servants smiled indulgently when their graces were late to cut the anniversary cake, and if the children rolled their eyes with fond exasperation, and if the portrait above the mantel seemed to smile down on them all, well, some love stories are meant to be legend. This one simply refused to end. The end.